Professor Tong, both China and the U.S. take the area of cybersecurity very seriously. The White House saying both sides are working on a framework for cooperation. How can they mutually build trust on this issue?
This is actually the basic foundation for the two countries to have a good cooperation in cyberspace security. Actually, as we all know, cyberspace has become a new domain for our social life, and it has completely changed the social life and also the international relations. How can we cooperate in this regard? For example, the United States actually insists on the anti-criminal activities in cyberspace, but China prefers to address the importance to protect its basic facilities of these domains. So I think there is a difference between the two countries, but I think after the hard struggle between the two countries, the negotiation now today is still under its way, and I'm sure when President Xi Jinping comes to Washington, D.C., there might be a document on the table of between the two presidents. So I think this is actually common ground for cooperation, a new domain for the two countries to cooperate in this regard.
And Professor Lisley, there in the United States, what's your take on the cybersecurity issue?
Well, it's one of the most significant points of friction in the relationship right now. Obviously, the U.S. and China both have deeply shared interests in preventing certain types of cyber attacks and cyber damages. We talked about the UN Code of Conduct on critical infrastructure and such. We've certainly talked about political hacking, as it were, hacking into government records and so on. These are areas where all countries have their problems with it. I think where we have a lack of trust here is the sense in the United States that the U.S. has been the target of much cyber hacking from China, some of it state-linked, and the U.S. has been somewhat dissatisfied with the response. But part of the complicating factor here is that all countries, including the U.S. and China, do some amount of cyber spying on one another. And that's just something that I think everybody accepts. And much of the point of friction has been the U.S. sense that some of the cyber vulnerabilities to hackers based in China have been very much on the economic side. And from the U.S. perspective, this is a national economic security issue. So there is, I think, a lot of distrust, a lot of concern there because of a sense that this is a part of the U.S. economy that is particularly important and also particularly vulnerable to cyber hacking. So I think anything that can be done to get the dialogue going again, to get the working group back in place, would be a positive development. And this does look like the most likely area to see something concrete, something not fully foreshadowed coming out of it, much like the climate change accord from the last time we had sort of a pleasant surprise out of top-level bilateral meetings. But I think it's going to be a genuinely tough one to work out. And I think in some ways the best way for building trust on this is for China to be transparent and forthcoming and engage in the dialogue. And in the very long term, as China proceeds down its path to developing an innovation economy, the misalignment of interests, that is the sense of who benefits from cyber hacking and who doesn't, that misalignment is likely to narrow some.
Well, Professor Tong here in the studio, of course, the issue of cybersecurity is one of those issues that divide, but what about the issue of the whole issue of economic cooperation between China and the United States on a broader scope?
Actually, the economic cooperation has been so far so good between the two countries, but we heard some complaints from the U.S. side that the traditional way to buy more aircraft, to buy more rice or agricultural products actually is not strong enough to be a waiter, to balance the large ship of the two countries to moving forward. So new ideas, new sectors should be added to the cooperation. For example, as we discussed just now, BIT actually is a new area for the economic cooperation. And also the United States urged China to open its financial market. And of course, China would like to ask the United States to open its high-tech, export to China. So I think there are a lot of rooms for the two countries to cooperate in economy and in trade.
I would just add the BIT, I think, is the Bilateral Investment Treaty, is a very promising development. I mean, it shows a movement toward agreement on standards, and is very important to China as increasingly an outbound investor rather than simply a recipient of inbound capital.